Good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm hoping that you can hear me very well. There's been background noise. Welcome to Transformational Tuesdays. I may actually just adjust the microphone and see if that makes a difference. I'm hoping it does. Hopefully that's a little bit better. So today is a very interesting, Jackson, how are you, brother? Welcome. Today's a very interesting subject matter, and it's something that has been an important subject matter to me for some time. Hi Carol, thank you for joining. Just everyone who's joining, who's coming on, always like, this is really cool. Just put a little emoticon with respect to how you're feeling today. If you're happy, put a happy face. If you're sad, put a sad face. If you're angry or distressed, put a distressed face. If you're connected, put something that symbolises connection, whatever it may be. But just pop a little comment there and an emoticon in the comment section. Let me know how you're feeling, because we can speak to that as well. And it all ties into what we're about to speak to this evening with respect to the shadow self and understanding the shadow self and the importance of the shadow self. But you know, I've spoken to this quite a few times before with respect to what the shadow self is, and we'll recap that briefly now, very briefly. But we will go into greater depth with respect to why it's important to embrace and understand and connect to and feel into the shadow self. Steve, how are you? Thank you for joining. So, firstly, the shadow self, what is it? It's an aspect of self or aspects of self that we often dislike, that we often disown. They are disowned parts of our personality, disowned parts of our emotional expression. They're also disowned parts of our belief systems, our thought paradigms, just simply disowned, rejected parts of self that we do not value, that we do not appreciate, that we do not understand, that we do not connect to, that are perhaps ostracized by society, that are perhaps ostracized by some form of external values. Lena Matthew, thank you for joining. So I hope that just clarifies what the shadow self is. So it's a part of self that we neglect. It's parts of self that we do not really deeply appreciate. Alexandra, thank you for joining. So, and the consequences or the outcomes of doing so is that we actually neglect, negate and ignore an integral aspect of self, an aspect of self that is vital to our own growth, to our own understanding of the world, to our own evolution and development. Because what happens is we fragment ourselves. We become almost broken by nature. And if we are broken or if we are fragmented, we are not whole, of course. So we lose this wholeness of self, this wholeness aspect of self that we cannot connect to. Of course, if we are not whole, there are a number of factors that can affect. Hi Renee, how are you? Renee, I need to ring you back. Don't worry, I have not forgotten. I was just a little bit hectic the last couple of days, but I'm going to get to you soon. Jackson says, I've learned a lot about the shadow self and being aware of it, in my case, the jackal. Good to see your face here. Thanks, Jackson. I've been, good to see you too, brother. I've been off air a little bit of late, exploring the shadow self, in fact. And I'll speak to that later on this evening in this talk. But I've been deep immersion into self and am still deeply immersed in self with respect to the shadow aspect and connecting to and understanding. Brooke, how are you? Thank you for joining. And feeling into that and feeling the feelings that are associated with disowned parts of self or parts that we don't truly acknowledge or appreciate or even can comprehend the magnitude of. But back to what I was speaking to with respect to wholeness. Now, wholeness is so important because wholeness provides us with a real view of who we are, with an authentic, encompassed view of self, of the whole of who we are. Think of it, hey Brooke, think of wholeness this way. Think of peering out of, if you've ever been on a cruise ship before, or in a tanker or in a ship, but you can imagine though the small porthole windows, it provides a very limited view of what we can see or what we're able to observe outside of the ship. That's a fragmented state of being. That's a polarized view of self. It's a polarized view of reality and a polarized view of the way we move through the world. Imagine now that you are outside, you're on the roof of the deck of the ship, and you just have this 360-degree view of your reality, of your external environment. That, my friends, is wholeness. That, my friends, is completeness. That is truth. That is authentic truth. Now, given yes, we cannot concentrate on the entirety of life at all times, but being in that position elevates us to increase our potential of doing so. So when we do not ignore integral aspects of self, we increase our potential for moving towards wholeness. We increase our potential for becoming closer related to aspects of self that actually add a significant amount and considerable amount of value to our lives. And they do so because they provide us with insight, which is a beautiful feminine quality, which then provides us or lays the foundations, sorry for the shake in the video, which lays the foundations for foresight, an incredible masculine quality as well. And the two work in a juncture. They work collaboratively together to understand self, to move through self and move through the world in a way that is very enriching and empowering, because we are able to leverage two expressive states. Hi Lisa, thank you for joining. Two expressive states that essentially come from the one source, the wholeness of self, the integrated nature of self. And when we realize that the masculine and the feminine work together symbiotically to create this wonderful version of reality that is wholeness, yeah? So the title of today's live video is Embrace Your Shadow First, Otherwise No One Else Will. And I want to elaborate on this, and I would like to explore this with greater depth with you, because it's deeply important to understand this notion, this concept. And people, if you have any questions, please write them in the comments. I'll answer them as I'm going along. I'm sure I'll be able to keep up. And if I lose track, well, that's okay. We'll lose track of the conversation. It's important to answer some of the questions, or just even explore, delve into some of the questions, because your feedback is not only valuable for me to learn and grow, but it's valuable for the people that are watching on this live feed as well. So your thoughts definitely matter. So if you have a question, pop it in there. That would be greatly appreciated. And it really drives the conversation, and it drives what we're speaking to in a very empowering manner. So if we don't, so I've learned this firsthand. So what holds us back from embracing our shadow is generally, if we had to really simplify it, if we had to reduce it, not that I'm a huge advocate of reducing concepts or reducing complex issues, for example, but if you had to reduce it, what negates us from moving into our shadow self is fear. And the fears vary for each individual. Everybody is different in the way they communicate and connect to their fear, and the way they express fear, or the way that we allow fear to rule or occupy our lives, or even influence our relationships and influence who we are. So it becomes very important to understand that fear is a driving factor in distancing us from our shadow self. And what I mean by embracing our shadow self, if we can speak about our shadow and then it becomes conscious, and it no longer becomes a shadow element of self per se, but we can speak deeply to the shadow, but unless we live through it, unless we embrace it, unless we acknowledge it, unless we take complete ownership of our shadow self, we are effectively losing an integral aspect of self, and we're losing an important connection that we can have to gaining that wholeness that I spoke to earlier. Hi Sharon, thank you for joining, we appreciate it. So embracing our shadow self first provides us an opportunity to know ourselves in fullness. So when we present to the world, when we present to ourselves, when we present to ourselves in relationship, and that's any relationship, it's not just an intimate relationship or an erotic relationship I'm speaking to any relationship, whether it be a sibling and a parent, whether it be a friends, colleagues, it's irrelevant, it's any relationship. Particularly this deep stuff comes up in intimate relationships, especially the shadow self is exposed in intimate relationships for a number of different reasons. We're so intertwined and integrated that we trigger ourselves deeply because there's so much emotion that fluctuates between our relationships. There's so much generally deep love, but with that deep love also comes a polarization, and we'll speak to that in a moment as well. We'll speak to that polarization and what that actually means. So fundamentally, if we don't own our shadow self, we cannot expect others to own our shadow self, or we cannot expect others to even understand or relate to or connect to or feel into or be with our shadow self if we cannot own it ourselves, if we cannot embrace it, if we cannot connect to it, understand it, feel into it, take ownership of it, acknowledge and actually respect it. We cannot expect others to do that either. And that becomes a dangerous game, because we move into relationship fragmented. We move into relationship almost broken by nature. And this is something that I've experienced multiple times in my life. And you know, we grow deeply when we acknowledge who we are, and we acknowledge the lessons and the teachings that come with life experience, and we acknowledge that, hey, we were this person, we could have been this person, it's okay that we weren't, I embrace that, I'm okay with that, I can feel into that and sit with that and stay with that and remain with that. But here is what I've learned, and here is what I'm going to take into the next phase of my existence, the next part of my life. As the train moves and gains momentum, it's doing so with a newfound energy, it's doing so with a newfound realization of self. Again, reiterate, this is so important. If we don't embrace that shadow self, how can we expect or want others to do that for us? We move in a fragmented manner in our relationships. We become broken by our choices, the choices that we make, the choices to neglect who we are and who we wish to truly be. And it plays out in our relationships, and it plays out in our relationship to self. We lose ourselves in that instance, in that moment, or in those series of moments. To give fully to self and to respect self fully, and through a deep vulnerability, through an encompassing vulnerability of self. In other words, to be open to what we feel, irrespective of if it feels bad or if it hurts or if it's painful, but to feel the pain and recognize that I am that pain right now. I am that fear right now. I am that difficulty and that challenge right now. And to take ownership of that and just be with that. Don't ignore it, don't suppress it, don't reject it, don't push it to the side, just to be with that. Hi Anna, thank you for joining. That is an integral component and a process of connecting to the shadow self, taking ownership of the shadow self. And this liberates us from experiencing perpetual pain, from experiencing continuous pain in life and making the same choices over and over and over again. So the first step to all this is, the first step is having a yearning, encompassing a yearning within self to transform and transmute and realize who we truly are. The second stage to this process of embracing the shadow self, Yanni, how are you, brother? Thanks for joining. To embracing the shadow self is respecting, revering, and being vulnerable with the shadow self. In other words, allowing the feelings to come up as they need to come up, as you feel they are required to come up. To not ignore and suppress and reject, but rather to hold in a very safe space. So hold your fears, hold your feelings, whatever they may be, whether they are feelings of embarrassment, feelings of rejection, feelings of betrayal, feelings of anger, feelings of deep-seated sadness. Ashley, how are you, brother? Thank you for joining. To hold these feelings in reverence, respect, and deep vulnerability. And when we do so, we allow these feelings to rise to the surface of consciousness. And rather than being stuck in the shadow self, guess what? We liberate them. We liberate these feelings and we give them form. And in that form, we can connect to them, we can dissipate them. If they need to be dissipated, we can shift them and move them. They don't become locked in our unconscious self, and they don't become locked in our nervous systems. Now, there are many different modalities you can engage in doing this. You can engage in very specific breath work. You can engage in various therapeutic modalities as well. You can go through a process of just conscious inquiry. But shift this stuff, and shift it by acknowledging it, by being present with it. Sharon says, speaking straight to truth and heart. Steph, I appreciate what you're sharing. Well, thank you, Sharon. I appreciate your kind words as well. And of course, and Lisa says, be with my cranky, but avoid all others while I'm in it, as then I don't project and can acknowledge them. Lisa, yes. So there's boundaries and processes that come with this, okay? And it's very circumstantial, but effectively what you're doing is, it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to be jealous. It's okay to be deeply sad. It's okay to be frustrated, because society tells us that these states of being, these emotional expressions are not healthy, that we should ignore them. We shouldn't be that way. It's not etiquette. It's not appropriate to be in a social setting in that way. And I'm not saying, scream at the top of your lungs and abuse people in public or anything like that. I'm talking about when you feel something, acknowledge it. Take ownership of it. If you avoid it, it's just going to come up in other ways, and it's going to perpetuate within the entirety and fullness of our being. Whereas when we acknowledge our emotions, we're able to process them with clarity. That's the key. We have clarity. We obtain deep clarity. And I hope that helps, Lisa. I hope that makes a little bit more sense. So instead of projecting them correctly outwards to other people, or in our relationships, because we don't have an understanding or connection to them, we acknowledge them, and it's not controlling them. It's not about controlling. It's about empowering ourselves with realizing that it's okay to have these emotions. Otherwise we get stuck in this polarized view of self. Charu says, anger often comes out of sadness and vice versa. How do we recognize true emotion behind the underlying one? Exploration, Charu, is the answer to that. And often it's a very deep exploration, and if it can be facilitated and supported in some way, that's going to be deeply helpful. But you can do that yourself, and you can also do that with surrounding yourself with loved ones or people that are really articulate in this space. But effectively, you're very right, anger often comes from a deep sadness. But how do we keep unpacking the underlying emotions? Is we keep exploring, and we can only do that when we feel the superficial emotions, or we feel the emotions. Hey brother, good to see you. Sorry, I just said hello to someone. But as we unpack our layered emotions, we go deeper. So if we don't start at the top, we cannot go deeper. If we don't start, and we use this hierarchical structure just for simplicity's sake. But if we don't start at the top of the emotion and what we're feeling, if we don't unpack that, and we can only unpack it by feeling it, by acknowledging it, by empowering ourselves with it, understanding the source of it, even understanding its why, we can't go deeper. Anthony, thank you for joining, brother. So Matthew says, perhaps the very act of giving it a name and thereby an acknowledgement gives us license, permission to undertake active management of it better. My animus made regular frightening appearances in my dreams. Beautifully said, Matthew. Beautifully, beautifully said. When we give ourselves permission to feel, we give ourselves permission to explore. And if we explore, we generally wish to explore at depth. It's not wishing to explore in a superficial manner. We wish to explore at great depth. But we can only do that when we start. The journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. We can't take further steps if we don't take the first step. Resonance. It took me a while to be with them and know when to stay away from others, or tell them I'm not in the space for chatting like a warning. And that's a deep reverence and respect for yourself and for those in your life, Lisa. But again, if we don't begin to explore and unpack these feelings and these emotions, especially within the realm of the shadow self, we lose an integral part of self. So the next step, because this can get very deep, and this is I'm providing a very deep, a very simple synopsis of what this process looks like. Exploring the shadow self is something that needs to be done with great care, great reverence and respect, and needs to be done in a supported manner as well, actually, for various reasons. Because it can be very confronting, it can be deeply confronting and deeply hurtful and deeply painful as well, and that's why most of us don't do it. And most of us can't do it because it is too confronting and too painful, and it disrupts the entirety of our lives. So addressing this and approaching this in bite-sized morsels is definitely advisable. But the resilient warrior plays a powerful role in our motive, in our relational and our spiritual evolution of self. And when I'm speaking to the resilient warrior, I'm speaking to vulnerability and self-love and stepping into that. But I'm also speaking to the resilient warrior has an ability to be not only tough but also resilient. And toughness, briefly, toughness is our ability to move through pain, through present moment pain and challenge and adversity and difficulty. And resilience is our ability to recover from that scenario, recover from that challenge, that adversity, that difficulty, that pain point, and then move on to the next challenge in life or the next obstacle in life, yeah? So the resilient warrior is not polarized by nature. The resilient warrior embraces the shadow self fully. The resilient warrior understands to and connects to and loves all aspects of self. Not just the happy aspects of self, or the joyful aspects of self, or the parts of self that are giving and accepted by society in wholeness or fullness, but rather everything that we are. All the yucky parts, all the disowned parts, all the parts that aren't very attractive. That is what the resilient warrior has a capacity to do. So implementing a very stoic approach to life, and this is part of that resilient warrior posture, is that there is value in everything that we experience. And if we move with that belief system, because our belief systems of course underpin our actions and our behaviors and the way we move through the world, if we move through life with a belief system of everything, every experience in life has value, every experiential state in life carries a tremendous value, we begin to move with greater clarity and move with a greater confidence towards the shadow self, therefore embracing a posture of wholeness. This becomes important for our growth and our own evolution, but also the evolution of our relationships and the contribution that we make to other people and the contribution that we make to the important people in our lives. So I'm hoping that's starting to make some sense now, and if it is, just let me know, give me a thumbs up, give me a smiley face. Let me know that there's resonance there, because if we're on the right track, I'm going to continue with speaking to a belief system or a posturing of avoidance and acceptance. Catherine, hello, how are you? Yes, it disrupts, it's confronting, it's painful, and it's fucking necessary. We just continue to look for another distraction. It is such a gift to be able to step back and own the dark self. Unfortunately, it's cut the rest of your message off, Catherine, but I totally resonate, deeply resonate with what you've just said. If we don't embrace the shadow self, we just continue to take steps backwards. We just continue to, backwards being a metaphor or symbolic for a lack of growth, a lack of evolution and transformation of self, our relationships, and our lives. So the shadow self is so much more important than what we think. It's more than just being tough. So that history doesn't repeat. Absolutely, Catherine, because that is stagnation in growth and stagnation in self. Being a resilient warrior isn't just about being tough or being resilient. Being a resilient warrior is about stepping into the fullness of self and giving to self from a place of deep love and connection. Oh man, you're the best, Jackson. So I appreciate it, brother. That's dedication and commitment, man. So I do what I do. I love you, my friend. Thank you so much. So that's a yes. I only needed one. So we're good with resonance. So I want to speak to avoidance and I want to speak to acceptance. And when we have an avoidance coping strategy or an accepting coping strategy, it deeply influences our behaviors and the way we move through the world. And this is an avoidance coping strategy and an acceptance coping strategy is a behavioral component of self, but it's also a very much a neurological component of self, and it's linked into our attentive circuitry within the brain and what we pay attention to and what we choose to pay attention to. The power of reinterpretation and reframing in alignment with our values and in alignment with our higher self adds tremendous value to, again, our relationships, but adds tremendous value to ourselves and our own evolution, our own growth. So if we have an avoidant coping strategy, what it basically means is that we choose, oh man, when we're teaching, we're learning, and we're learning, we're teaching, brother Jackson. I'm learning just as much from you as you are from me, and I deeply appreciate that, my friend. Very humble. Thank you so much. But this is interesting, this avoidant coping strategy versus an acceptance coping strategy. And with respect to an avoidant coping strategy, we tend to move away from what ails us or what pains us or what fears us. We move away, we push away, we suppress, we reject our shadow self, right? This is what we do in an avoidant coping strategy. So we also limit ourselves in life for doing so because we come from fear, we come from a closed, restricted, constricted, fearful, a scarcity-based mentality. We come from that place. Our nervous system is tight and rigid. We can't be exposed to an openness of life. We come from that place and we limit our experiences, we limit our potential. Brooke says, it took me a while to realise that the fear of the shadows of ourselves is only temporary. To sit, observe, feel, get messy and immerse into them without attaching to them and then to come through. That non-attachment component is so important, Brooke, and thank you for sharing that. And the other important point to your note there, to your message, to your comment, what I pick up from that is that temporal nature of things and temporal nature of being. Now, the last few months for me have been, I can't even begin to explain the amount of pain and deep personal subjective suffering that I've experienced, personally, me. And it's taken me to some fucking bad places. Like, it's taken me to some very unfamiliar places. And I've been in the hurt locker before, I've been in pain before, I've been in fear, immersed in it before, but nothing like the last few months. And I'm going to tell you why that happened before I continue with the avoidant and the acceptance coping strategies. It happened because I made a very conscious choice to just keep going deep and keep going deep and keep going deep and unpacking and unlayering and keep going fucking deep. And I'm still doing that. And I'm forcing myself to do these live feeds because I'm not forcing, I don't force. Well, I have forced, actually. There you go. So that's an example. So in my life, I have forced. The shadow aspect of self for me has been forcefulness and control. Trying to control the outcome or control the situation or control the emotional state or the emotional feeling or force a particular outcome to the way that aligns with what I perceive to be right or in alignment in my life. And it's disrupted me. So for the first time in as many years as I can remember, I've slowly released the forcefulness, I've slowly released the control aspect of self and have just done my best to immerse in the moment and in the feeling and go deep within that feeling. Where's it coming from? What does it mean? But just how does it feel? What is the fear behind it? What are these fears? Where are they coming from? And the only reason that's been able to happen is because I've just fully opened self. I've fully opened my heart. And it's the most liberating feeling because for 35 years of my life, I haven't been able to open my heart to the degree and the depth that I have now. And because I've done so, because I've made a choice, conscious choices to look at self, to observe self, to feel into self, my heart has opened and it has allowed space, deep, deep space for contemplation and exploration to take place. And it's a gift. It's a gift, but it comes with a lot of pain and fear. But it is temporary and every moment transmutes. And it's not always the same. Sometimes we'll go back and forth and we'll experience different forms of pain. But it is in a constant flux. And if we shift our focus to what is working in life, and if we shift our focus to our courage, and if we shift our focus to the fact that we are doing something that we have never done before, in a way that we have never done before, and we admire and we revere ourselves for that process, that becomes empowering and it gives us hope. And faith and hope and surrender is sometimes all we need and all we have. And it's a direct pathway to connecting to the shadow self. It's just surrendering to all that we are. I'm curious to know people's vantage point and perspective and own personal experiences on surrender and what it means for them, what surrender symbolizes for you, and importantly, where you have surrendered in your life and what is the outcome or the evolving outcome of surrender been, of course. It's a most enlightening and enriching process, and it's truly deeply liberating. I appreciate you letting me share that. So, avoidance and acceptance. Avoidance is highly restrictive. acceptance. Acceptance of self, acceptance of circumstances, acceptance of what we are feeling and who we are is deeply revelatory. And it's what I call an immersion into an open state of being, where it comes from courage, we are open to information coming into us, we are infinitely curious, we are not restricted nor constricted by nature, but rather very liberated in our being. We are highly intuitive. It's a desirable state of being, whereas being in a closed state of being, or in an avoidant state of being, or an avoidant state of being is part of being in a closed posturing, doesn't allow us to experience the fullness of life, and won't really allow us to go deep in the shadow, because it ignores the shadow and it is fearful of the shadow, because it comes from fear, it comes from pain, it comes from disconnect and disheartenment. So when we come from a place of acceptance, we increase our opportunity to experience life fully, and we increase our potential for living. And that, to me, people, is beautiful. When people ask me what is the meaning of life, I immediately answer, well, for me there are multiple meanings to life, but one of the primary meanings to life is growth and expansion, and we only need to look to nature to understand and connect to that. But growth and expansion is a beautiful aspect of self, and is a beautiful state to immerse in. And when we are growing and expanding, we are being openly and honestly our authentic selves. It doesn't necessarily come without hardship. But it's worth it. If you can trust me, more importantly, trust your own being, it's worth it. Catherine says, experienced the same in the last few weeks. Surrendering and accepting is the only way. I realise by holding on, we're actually self-sabotaging our path. The lesson is to learn to trust. You know, that self-sabotage is really interesting, and the more we hold on, the more rigid we are, and the more we come from a closed state of being. And I've definitely learned that the hard way. So we sit with the feelings, and we sit with the teachings, and we sit with the wisdom, and we hope to grow through conscious choices. The book says, continuing to unpack that mother trucking suitcase, staying open and staying in our hearts and sharing that, and being vulnerable and honest and loving. Yeah, it's a beautiful topic. It's one that is neglected, and is one that requires a deep level of attention. Going to say goodbye, only a temporary goodbye, because life is temporarily fleeting. I say thank you so much for joining. I will make once again mention to a very exciting online program that I have, Chaos to Clarity, a journey towards peak consciousness, where we unpack the shadow self so deeply. The link is in the title of the live webinar on this webinar feed, just below the video, or above the video, should I say, on Facebook. And it is, we create, there are a number of different exercises for understanding the shadow self in that space. It's a beautiful opportunity to connect to self, and also connect with a like-minded community, and connect with me, of course, which I'd be very grateful for, and very excited to do so. So check the link out. There's a lot of information there, and importantly, people, go deep within self. I know it's fucking hard. I know it's hurtful and painful and confronting and fearful, but if you don't, you're not being you. If you don't, you're not being true to who you are. And if you don't, you're not living life fully and openly. And if you don't go deep within self, you're not acknowledging the fullness of who you are. There's always much love and much reverence for all of you, for your loved ones, for humanity, and for Earth, of course. Find your purpose, find what stimulates you, find what drives you, find what inspires you, and just fucking live that every day. Craig, thank you for joining, my friend. Just about to wrap up. Please feel free to go back and watch the live feed. I think you'd like this one, my friend. Much love to all of you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being present. And if you, of course, have any questions or if you wish to know more about what I do, please feel free to contact me. Many blessings on your journey. I'll see you in the next live feed in the next few days or week or so. Take care, lots of love, and of course, if you resonate with this, please, please, please share it. Thank you so much, people. Lots of love.